This podcast for me is that beacon. I think we're going to navigate the peaks and valleys of running a group practice together. I don't think anybody's too broken, too complicated, or too far gone as a business owner or a clinician to find a better, brighter chapter.
Tired of being burned out, underpaid, and boxed in by a broken mental health system? Welcome to Off the Chair, where visionary therapists talk business, burnout, and building something better.
Because to lead, to earn more, reclaim your creativity, and truly change the mental health system, we have to get off the chair and into the role of visionary, CEO, and change maker.
I'm Dr. Colleen Long, psychologist, entrepreneur, and founder of a 7-figure practice I built, broke, rebuilt, and exited. I'm here to ask the hard questions. How do we adapt? How do we survive? And how do we fight back against a system outsourcing mental health to the lowest bidder?
I'm Erica Bugaj, clinical social worker, psychotherapist, group practice founder, and doctoral student. I work with therapists who want to build brave, values-led businesses without burning out. Because real growth doesn't just happen in the chair, it happens when you step out of it.
And I'm Dr. Jennifer Politis, psychologist, entrepreneur, multi-site group owner of a 7-figure practice, and business coach obsessed with making strategy simple, sustainable, and 0% BS. I help therapists lead like CEOs and build businesses that work for them, not the other way around.
No fluff, no fake success stories. Each week, we'll dive into honest conversations about hiring, money, leadership, scalable income, and leveraging modern technology to build a more innovative, profitable practice. This is Off the Chair. Now let's get on with the show. So our intention, if we nail this podcast, at least for me, is to give people a better way to see that there is a better way. There's an alternative way. It's not just having to trade your time for money in the way that the insurance companies would have us believe. And we do really need some sort of union or advocacy. But until then, I think providing therapists with an alternative for how to use their unique expertise that they've worked so hard for, that they've honed, that they've cultivated over sometimes decades, and that they've paid dearly for emotionally and monetarily, giving them a way to take that as a moat and make a living off of it where they don't have to become insurance companies' vicarious employee or advocate. So that would be a win for me.
I think I have a similar win is I just wish I could help someone where I was maybe 5 or 8 years ago and just help other practitioners and other business owners who are completely stressed out, just not living the life that they set out to live. And, I just think that's the most important thing that I want to do is just, again, help people on the other side of this. That's my main goal.
I agree. I also found myself at a certain point just putting my head down, trying to soldier through and push myself to find the next best strategy for keeping my practice afloat. I got all kinds of coaching. I attended masterminds and received financial advice from professionals. All of it has not necessarily added up to things always running smoothly. And I think that's to be expected, but I have found myself a couple times at crossroads where I just am not sure if I can keep doing this. And I still sit there a lot of the time. I have a wonderful staff. I aspire to pay them well and offer benefits to them. But I still find that there are many systems in place, such as using commercial insurance, which I've opted to do in a high cost of living city, because I think there are folks here that can't afford to pay for the cost of therapy. So finding a way through navigating all of these different systems and forces has been very challenging and has at times led me to feel burned out.
Yeah. And there was a book that I read, Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks. Have you guys read that book?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I haven't.
So good. So good. So it's called the Anti-Productivity Book. And there's a million productivity books out there. but his is about how we're all just trying to squeeze in $1 out of 15 cents every day, right? We're all trying to like get everything done. And especially as women, you're trying to be the mom and carry the mental load and then also be the CEO and the therapist and all that, right? But his premise is you're really only here on average 4,000 weeks. Like all of us are here about 4,000 weeks, which kind of puts things into perspective. And so he says, if you wait until the very end where all of the other stuff, the have tos are checked off to do the things that you want to, you're never going to get to that. And so you have to just start doing the things that you want to in the midst of all of that. That's really the key to balance and happiness. And so for me, the selfish reason of doing this podcast is I love the creative aspect of it. I love like being able to, I mean, this is almost going to be like group therapy, you know, being able to talk with two other people who know not only the struggles of just being in the mental health field, but being a group practice owner and all the stuff that comes with it, right? There's not very many people in the world that understand that unique struggle. But then just the creativity of being able to build something out of nothing and hopefully something that becomes a really useful resource for thousands of people, I think is just like so cool. And the fact that we're actually like doing this, that's just amazing.
I think it's been such an isolating process for me as a business owner in particular that I, went through periods of trying to find support groups and masterminds and everything. And it's exhausting and you're not finding your people and you're not really, you're trying to spend time and energy and money on these things. And sometimes you get lucky and find something, but I do think I could have used a friend, a colleague along this way.
Yeah. What do they call it? A business bestie.
Yeah.
I borrowed that from, I can't remember her name now, but she's awesome. And she's also in our field. And she was talking about that idea that like, she's like, Colleen, you need like a business bestie. You're doing this all alone. And I think so many of us do this all alone just because you got to put your head to the grindstone and just do it every morning. You got to just do it even when you don't feel like it. So hopefully this will help the others that don't have that right now feel a little less alone.
I also think a lot of the business advice out there does not apply to our industry.
Yeah. What comes to mind when you say that?
Even some of the financials, I know, like meeting with certain people and they would have like different ratios of what works and where your profit should be. And it's just not feasible, especially if you take insurance. Now, we do take out of network insurance, so there's a little bit of wiggle room there. It's not in network, but there is still a cap on how much that can be.
Yeah. And there's an unspoken rule in our field, more so than others. Like if you listen to other podcasts where it's medical doctors, dentists, a bunch of dudes, they're all like about money. I'm not going to do that because that doesn't make money. But if we say that, we're heartless, we're in the wrong field, maybe 100%. We need to reevaluate. You can see the comments on Facebook. If you're talking about, well, I'm not going to take Cal Optima anymore because they pay me less than I paid my nail artist over the weekend. You're a horrible person then. How dare you? And so I think that a goal for me, at least, is to disrupt that narrative, which is like, oh my God, like how much can you afford? $12? Great. I'm 6 figures in debt, but that $12 is going to go a long way. Like, fuck that. I'm not going to be in that space anymore. I refuse to hold that narrative. And I say, I've gone to school for 10 years to 6 years of post-grad and 4 of college. So 10 years total, not to mention the $4.80 I worked per hour in a lockdown mental health facility to get my hours, right? So no, I'm not, I do want to make money because I need to be able to afford my mortgage and to pay off my student loans.
Yeah.
I think that is a common struggle I see with a lot of my younger clinicians too, is adapting from the selfless social service profession mentality into one of, oh, I actually deserve to make a sustainable income doing this work. And that's a huge part of my job in my role as the owner of this practice, is helping them to navigate billing and collecting fees. And I find it to be one of the biggest pain points. I also wanted to say that in groups of therapists who are practice owners, I have often felt that there's a lot of pressure to not be vulnerable, to only share the wins and not share the dark behind the scenes challenges that we all of us face. I mean, if you're saying you don't face some of these challenges we've named, I think it can't be true because it comes up for everybody. Some of the challenges we've named around insurance, also staffing, retention, and the competition with the venture capitalist folks who, have leaders at the helm who are visionaries or MBAs, but who've never actually done the mental health training and worked in the low wage jobs and clocked to the unpaid internships. I think there's a lot that goes unspoken and unsaid when we get together as a field.
Yeah. I remember around Thanksgiving last year, I was in one of the darkest phases. And as we do this podcast, one of these episodes will be an autopsy of a practice, and I'll go through how we died by 1,000 cuts. But in my darkest hour, I reached out to a big group of therapists on one of the social media channels and just said, guys, I'm really struggling here. Like, I don't know how I got here. I can't find a biller. I can't. And I'm getting further in debt trying to pay my clinicians. And I'm now a prisoner of my practice. What do I do? I can't shut the doors because I'll lose my home. All that money that I've paid all my clinicians while the insurance companies have denied is now tied to my home. Like, what do I do? And I assumed in that vulnerability that all of our helping profession would then go, oh my God, me too. I'm glad someone else said this. You're not alone. It was the worst. It was like, I seriously would question myself if I'm that much in debt at this point. I would question your business practices. And it was like kicked while I was down. It was and I thought, these are the people that people are going to for help. These are the people that are supposed to have empathy. And sometimes it's the most cutthroat group of people and judgmental. So yeah, I'm right there with you, Erica. I hope that we can all be super open, super vulnerable with our deepest, darkest moments in this field, and people will feel a sense of relief. Like, oh my God, it's not just me. Like, this is a thing that's happening in our field right now.
What were some of your darkest moments for both of you?
I remember Thanksgiving morning. My kids were super excited running around the house because it's Thanksgiving. They don't have school. We're going to eat all day. And I was looking at a day of having to host and entertain family, and I couldn't make payroll. And I was being raked over the coals on social media by our patients because nobody was responding to them. And so we, at that point, were paying 2 intake coordinators 100 hours a pay period. So they were not only billing me, but taking overtime. And I looked at Ring Central and it said 89.7% of our calls went unanswered. So I had basically been stolen from. And at that point, I was saying to these employees who were demanding their paychecks, not only am I not going to pay you, but if you keep on coming after me, this is going to be a lawsuit because I have proof here that you haven't done your job. And in the state of Massachusetts, where you employ people, if you don't pay your employees right away, you owe them thrice. And so not only was I not able to pay payroll and had to go further into debt, leveraging my home, but these 2 people who had colluded and stole, I now owed 3 times their salary. And that's just one of like 20 different stories that happened over the course of COVID where people really took advantage of working remotely.
How about you, Erica?
Well, I'd say that one of the most challenging moments was, having a contractor, an insurance biller who stopped doing the work that they were contracted to do. And then being in a contract that I could not get out of without an attorney. For that reason, I can't say a whole lot about it, but it really was a moment of questioning the motivations of folks who get into the field in a variety of ways. You know, to be an insurance biller, to stop doing the work you've said you're going to do, and then fight for a contract to keep being paid. Had that gone on, I think that the business probably would have folded. I was fortunate to now have found someone who's doing the work and following up and staying in touch. But in my experience, that's been rare in the life of this practice, and is a reason why I did all the billing myself for many, many years until I just could not do it anymore. And I was told, like, by my coach, hey, you have to stop doing this because you need to focus on other things. But giving that aspect away was a huge act of trust, and that trust was broken.
Yeah, there are little traumas there,
Yes.
micro traumas that happen where you just lose trust for everyone. What about for you, Jen?
I think for me, it was a few things all at once. It was kind of on the tail end of COVID, coming out of COVID. My kids were still doing remote school. I have 3 kids. They were little at the time. And my husband at that time decided to leave his medical practice. He's a chiropractor. So we were financially making a change. I was, scaling, but pretty miserable, burnt out. And at the time, we had a huge insurance clawback of $300,000. It could have completely taken us under. I had to use personal savings for payroll. Done that many times, by the way. If I wasn't able to do that or take out a business loan, which I did have to do another time, I wouldn't have been able to keep the business. So around that time is when I decided to look to sell because I just didn't know what to do. And around that same time, I got a pretty bad, health diagnosis that just kind of was the icing on the cake of like, what am I doing? Like, why am I so stressed out? What am I even doing this for? And I think the irony is like, we do this to help people at the end of the day. And it's hard for your staff to maybe sometimes understand that. I think all practice owners really want to pay their staff well and try to. If the money's there, we do. It's not that we don't want to. It's just, people don't understand all that goes into it. And maybe financially what's really in the books.
Yeah, I think there's a feeling that you're GM or Jeff Bezos, that there's this endless pot of money that they're entitled to. And I found myself when my clinicians got really upset because at a certain point, I couldn't leverage any more debt. There was no more. And I remember a clinician saying, well, but this is what I'm owed. And I said, I understand. Would you like to call the insurance company with me? Because I don't have it. Please stop. I remember saying, please stop, because they kept coming after me. And again, I think when you have the money, and we all did during COVID, because it was, we were just trying to get our hands around the problem at that point. And we had the services and the setup, and life was good. And I think anybody can tell themselves they're a great business owner when life is good and business is good.
Of course.
You're like, oh, I got this. But then when, brass tacks starts coming around and insurance companies implement AI to deny every third claim, and your admin paperwork starts to come up, and you have to start looking at, well, you're billing me 3 hours for that 1 hour, and I can only bill that 1 hour. It becomes a lot of difficult conversations and a lot of, I think, resentment, like we're somehow turning into the bad guy. And I do understand in a sense why these VC companies become more successful, because they were taught systems. They were taught margins. They were taught how to forecast. If the insurance company is going to pay you $53 for your clinician to do a 90837, you're not going to be able to pay them $65 plus 401k plus matching.
Right.
It just doesn't work out, right? And so there is something to having someone that has that business sense that understands that. And I think all of us, unfortunately, just had to learn those lessons the hard way. We got our MBAs. What do they say on the mean streets of being a group practice owner?
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Yeah. So let's jump in. Erica, so today is our first ever podcast, our first ever attempt at this. And so we are going to start today by just telling our off the chair stories. And I imagine each of these will be an episode unto itself, and we'll have some days where we're recording on our own, and maybe that's when we do our deeper dive into our big stories. But we're each going to take like 10 to 15 minutes to talk about our off the chair stories. What was our moment or moments where we had those pivots where we were like, this is no longer sustainable? Erica, why don't you just start with what came up for you and what were those moments like for you that really burns that fire within you?
Well, I wrote something that kind of goes way back and starts with me as a social worker. I'm not sure if you want me to, rewind that far.
Yeah.
Well, I am the child of 2 career public school teachers, so I feel like being a helper is in my DNA. And as a child, I was in the gifted and talented classes at school. And I feel like as an adult, I learned what it really meant to have the drama of the gifted child. I learned that from my therapist through the book we've probably all read by Alice Miller. I was a very attuned child to all the emotional dynamics going on around me. And I think that's ultimately what led me to become a therapist. I spent years as a public school teacher and as a social worker in agencies, and I landed as the pediatric social worker in a local teaching hospital. There I was responsible for pediatric social work services, but most days I felt like a glorified administrative assistant to the psychiatric team. I highly value administrative work, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I was trained to do. And so there was somewhat of a power imbalance there between the psychiatrists and the social workers. I was asked to look things up on the internet, and they repeatedly paged me to find out when I'd have the psych patients transferred to a bed in the nearby psych facilities. I was the container for all the child abuse and neglect, the identified caller. And child life got to do all the fun stuff, like throwing parties and passing out donations. They also got all the accolades. I felt invisible, and in that role, I needed a magic wand. I've always joked that I needed one for my clients. In one job, I actually had one in my pen jar. It didn't really work, but in that role, I also needed one for my coworkers and colleagues. So there I found it truly difficult to utilize the MSW degree and the postgraduate clinical trainings I'd completed and pursued. I could not be a true clinician if I was not going to be seen as one. So I looked outside of that role and others I'd held for where I might make more of an impact to utilize my clinical skills and to operate more independently. So that's how I landed in private practice. I aspired to have a practice that accepted insurance in a high cost of living city. I wanted to provide therapy to folks like me. And judging from my waiting list, I was correct in the notion that everyday middle class in a big city people needed therapy, but probably could not afford the current rates set in this town. I know I couldn't. When a former social work intern who had impressed me expressed interest in joining me in this endeavor, I opened a group practice. I've now been running this practice for over 11 years, and sometimes I'm still trying to figure out how to provide therapy to folks who are using their insurance, provide decent wages and benefits to my team, and still get all the bills paid on time. It seems like this should not be a dilemma. I admit I've not always been the best with finances, but I've gotten help. I've gotten financial coaching. I have a CPA. I have an insurance biller. And I wonder why it's still so hard. I'm now pursuing my 3rd degree in social work because I love my profession. I still have the heart of a helper, but I don't know how much longer I can do this. I adore every single member of my team. They approach their work with humility. They have a shared vision for providing services to people who need it. But I have really found the systems, emphasis on systems, not just one, to work against us. My staff get independently licensed and they leave to work for venture capitalist therapy platforms with MBAs or visionaries at the top who have never been in the trenches doing unpaid internships, practicums, working for low wages, or learning the art and science of helping people. The churn and the constant thrash has led me to wonder and reflect that there must be a better way. But sadly, I often question it. I haven't discovered it yet, how to make it work. And that's where I find myself today as the owner of this group practice.
Love that. I don't love that for you, but I love the rawness and vulnerability. And I think it has to apply to so many people. It certainly hit with me.
Yeah. And that's really my hope, is that in finding other, working with other like-minded therapists, we can find ways to crack the code, this mysterious code that none of us with advanced degrees seems to be able to figure out.
Yeah.
Yes, but we're all searching for it.
Relentlessly, too.
Yeah.
I know.
All right. Well, I'll go into my off the chair moment. When I was young, I grew up in a very small town called Clarksville, Indiana, very close to Louisville, Kentucky. And there were a couple of ways out of said small town. And I love that small town. I go back to that small town quite a bit, especially for Derby. But I knew this wasn't the landing point for me. And I watched my mom, who was a single mother post-divorce, really struggle with money. And when you struggle with money, money is the thing that is talked about all the time. You talk about money all the time. Do you know how much that uniform cost me? Do you know how much that cost me? Do you know, it's all that. So I very much grew up in a scarcity mindset. And I think probably in all the psychoanalysis I've done, I've learned that money for me equals survival. It equals death if you don't have it, which sounds insane, but that's what happens to my body internally when I'm fearful around it, is that I'm not going to live. And so even now in, Orange County, California, and we're doing okay. We don't have any chance of going homeless anytime soon. I still feel that early trauma of growing up very in poverty. And so the idea that was impressed upon me was you either become a doctor, a lawyer, or you marry one. And since marriage didn't seem to work out for my mom, I thought, well, I'm not going to bank on that one. And lawyering seemed very dry. So I said, well, I'll be a doctor. And like you, Erica, school was one of those things that just came easy. Academics, it was easy. I could figure it out. Stats, I hated stats, but I could just throw myself into stats. And I was the one that was teaching everybody else stats and physics and chem and organic chem and all that. And so I was in the pre-med track, and I felt really safe when I was going down that track, because I knew that once I was a doctor, I could always have that insurance policy in the back of my pocket, that I'll always have a job no matter what, that I'll never have to worry about not having a roof over my head. No matter if I get divorced, I will always have an ability to support myself. And really, that's where it started, was probably that just small trauma, being a young girl, not knowing where things were going to come from. So a lot of times when people get into therapy, if they don't have that scarcity mindset, I do think that they're truly coming from a higher level of being, which is like, I'm so fortunate and life is so abundant and I just want to give to others. That was not where it came from me. It was, I need to live. I don't want to be homeless. How do I do that? Doctor, great. So I did that, took the MCAT, didn't get into medical school the first year. No one told me, like, take a gap year, go to the south of France. It's beautiful this time of year. That's not the kind of narrative that's happening in my town. It's like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And so I wrote to some lady in grad school, and I think she was on her way out, but she felt sorry for me and she let me in. Unheard of, but that's what happened. I got out. A lot of things happened. I was an egg donor. I had a blackjack thing, a lot of stories I'll probably tell later. But that's how I got by. And I got out. I was going to NYU. I was fully like writing checks for my college. And it was a lot of creativity. But I got that PhD, PsyD. I got that PsyD after 4 years of college and 6 years of postgrad. So 10 years of unpaid work. And I felt safe for a little bit. And this was in early 2000s. So when you're making $200 an hour, that worked back then, especially when I didn't have kids and I was just married. And so I built a practice, and it was a nice little bougie practice in Manhattan Beach. I saw couples. I was deep into the clinical work of David Schnarch, and I was, loving what I was doing. But unless you've been a therapist, as you guys know, doing therapy, that hour, that clinical hour, takes so much out of you. Even when you have all the right muscles and tools and you've done your own work and you know how to hold the space for someone else without it infiltrating, it's a lot. You are fully, and for me as an ambivert, my battery runs low when I'm around people for a lot. And I was around people for a lot because that's how you make money. So it was intense. And I started doing testing. And the days that I did testing, I remember feeling like, oh, yeah, today's going to be an easy day, because it didn't take that same level of bandwidth that intense therapy, especially couples therapy, takes out of you. So that's where that path came for me, is that I stopped doing the couples therapy after about 10 years and switched into testing. Loved testing. Into testing, I remember my husband saying, and there's a lot of themes of my husband going, have you looked at your bank account? These are the major pivots. He said, have you looked at your bank account? And I said, no, why? And he said, you don't have any money in there. And I remember doing all this work, and I was working really, really hard. And I thought, why don't I have any money? And I just had a biller that just really wasn't doing anything. And I had no idea how to oversee them. I wasn't a biller. I didn't know. So I started doing all the billing, and I started doing all the admin, and I was on the phone with insurance companies going, all right, you can only adjudicate 3 claims a day, and, all of that stuff. So I read The 4-Hour Workweek, which was a game changer for me. And I've read several times since then, by Tim Ferriss.
I love that book.
I love it. It's so good. And every decade of my life, it has a new meaning. But at the time, it was like, look at your life and how you spend each hour. And are you the best person to be doing this activity right now? And every activity I was doing, the answer was no. Am I the best person to be sitting on the phone with an insurance company quibbling over $15 when I can charge $200 an hour? Probably not. So it was time for me to hire. I hired my first practice manager / biller. It quadrupled our practice income, and I was off to the races. At that point, I was like, got it. And that was the big, big lesson for me, is every single minute of my time, am I the only person? Am I the absolute best person that could be doing this? And that was what really started to change the trajectory of the practice. Then I started to realize, even after that, you can only make so much money a day, right? Because there's only so many hours in the day. And how much bandwidth are you going to have for the next 20 years to do this? So I hired my first clinician, then the next and the next. I had a group practice. And all of a sudden, I was a CEO. I was not a psychologist anymore. I was somebody that I was not prepared to be. I did not have an MBA. I did not know how to do systems or operations. I did not want to hold people accountable. I did not know what a KPI was, nor did I want to. And I had a lot of things that I was doing every day in building this freedom practice that did not feel very liberating. I did not feel that I had achieved freedom. Even though, yes, I had pulled myself off the chair and I was no longer trading my time for money and had figured out how to build something that would, quote, make money in my sleep, I wasn't sleeping that much. And in fact, I was working more than when I was working as a therapist, and started to envy my therapist who could just clock in and clock out for the day. And that was the end. My husband could clock in and clock out. And there was no like, are we going to make payroll on Thursday? Or how is this going to work? Or, and they didn't have to worry about that. And I had all of these worries all of a sudden and thought, what did you get yourself into? Why did you think you were good at this? And like, why are you here? And how do you get out? So I went through that issue where I just was kind of in a place where it felt like the point of no return. And especially after COVID, when we didn't know what was happening with the world, I just felt like I'm going to have to just keep going, because I don't know if we'll ever return to in office again. And I don't know what that means. I maybe have to like save up money for the end of the world. I don't know what's going on. And fortunately or unfortunately, we had arguably one of the biggest mental health issues at the time during then, because everybody was locked up. And so we made a good amount of money and we were doing okay. I was not doing okay, but we were doing okay. And so I think I started to stroke my own ego, pat myself on the back. I was like, I can do this. Look at me. I made this business out of nothing. And then the cash grab that happened with physicians about 10 years ago happened in our industry, where the venture capitalists saw an opportunity to exploit, and it was happening in front of our very eyes, and we didn't realize it was happening. And so the insurance companies figured out a way to be both the payer and the provider, and it got really bad. And so all that to say that I became a prisoner of my practice. My husband, again, 10 years later, said, after hiring my second in command, and at that point I was, mind you, I was still in the, I'm the visionary. I've figured this out, and I must have all the chops to be a great business owner. So I'm going to get my operator. And I did that whole EOS thing and went through 300 applicants and all of her references and Colby Index. And I thought, this is great. This is my operator. This is going to be my lifestyle income, lifestyle business. And I bet on the wrong pony. And this person, while very well heeled and very well spoken, had no clue what she was doing. And I learned all too late. So that'll be a story for a different time. But needless to say, my husband pops his head in my office and says, have you looked at the bank account? No, I haven't. I haven't had a look at the bank account in years. And he said, you might want to. And there was no money in there. And that was the first time I had to borrow to make payroll. That culminated into over $250,000 that I had to borrow to keep making payroll. Still thinking over a year, we're going to get this back. We're going to figure this out. We'll find the right biller. We'll figure this out. And the front office was not properly registering people. So we were getting denied on claims and then never getting paid for untimely filing. And yet I was left carrying the bag. I still had to sign off on all these reports and write all these reports. And at this point, all the clinicians had left because I couldn't pay anymore. So I was stuck. And I remember speaking with bankruptcy attorneys and saying, how do I do this? Like, I can't, this is unsustainable. And most of their advice was, I don't have any advice for you. You're stuck unless you want to lose your home, which was the personal guarantee. So I did end up rebuilding and restructuring. I clamped down on cost. I became a nuisance to every person that worked for me because every single one of their hours was tracked. And I exited last month. I sold my company and walked away and bruised still and barely intact. And I still feel like that scene on Captain Phillips where Tom Hanks is in the ship and they're like, you're okay. And he's like, I'm still in that, like, am I okay? Because I don't feel okay. For a year, I have felt like I was going to lose my home. And even though, like, if you look at all the dollars and cents, I'm okay now. It's okay. I'm on dry land. But it was super traumatic. And I would never, ever do that. If I had to go back, I would never do that. Never. And at the same time, like, fuck, I built a 7-figure practice out of nothing. This kid from Indiana who was told do you know how much that uniform cost? And, all that stuff. I built that from nothing. And there's some really, really great moments in there, but it was not fun and not something I would ever recommend anyone ever trying in this field ever again until we get help. So here I am. I'm in this next chapter, which is going to be all fun. It's going to be all creative, and it's going to be just play. It's going to be going back to like what my kids do when they wake up in the morning, which is like, how much fun can I suck out of this day? And life is short. And so that's where I'm at, is I just want to help rip that collar off and that blindfold off for clinicians that are maybe starting and help them find a way to feel freedom and to use that moat that we have.
Thanks for sharing, Colleen. I think Erica and I can't wait to see what you do next. And hopefully you can motivate us to have more joy in our life and start playing more.
Congratulations again. And that's really inspiring to hear.
Yeah, thank you. I really am so excited. And I don't think it's fully set in yet that I have exited. And I'm still in it, right? Like I still am helping with the transition and all of that, but I don't think it's quite set in. There are moments though where my practice manager will say, well, they're wanting this much money to do this. What do you want to do about it? And I can go, not my problem. Not my problem. And that's where it starts to feel real.
Is there a certain time frame you're staying on for?
Yeah. So we have got a sort of earn-out structure, which I think is pretty common in these deals where, you know, they want you to have skin in the game, which I get, totally get. So I'm staying on, we hit a revenue benchmark for year 1 and 2. And I'm confident this new buyer is a rock star. They've done this before and they've got way more operational chops than I do. So I'm excited to see where they take this. And, you know, unfortunately or fortunately have a very cyclothymic mind. You know, it's not at the point where I would say bipolar 2, but I definitely have my moments of hypomania where I've got these ideas and unfortunately or fortunately I've been released. The beast have been released to seek out these ideas now. And so I love that Mark Twain quote where he says, with enough ignorance and self-confidence, success is sure.
It's a good one.
That's where I'm at, is I've got a ton of ignorance and a ton of misplaced self-confidence. And I've got a ton of ideas that always come. And so I just am really excited about all the things that I want to do next. And really also not being just scared to lose my literal roof over my head.
Awesome story.
Yeah. So let's hear yours, Jen.
So I guess I'll start a little bit from the beginning. I think many people have always asked me, and I'm sure they've asked you, why did you want to sit in the therapist chair? Why did you become a therapist? For the longest time, I would always say, of course, to help people. I'm an empath. I always could read people very well. But honestly, if you locked eyes with me and really asked me, the truth is I was a perpetual new kid. We lived in 5 states before I turned 14. Moved within states. So there were more moves within that time. And, you know, a move smack in the middle of my freshman year of high school, it completely shattered me. 14, 15 years old. I was in a fog of depression. My parents were not very pro-therapy people. And I remember watching like Oprah at the time and being like, oh, I need to see a therapist. I remember asking my mom for a very long time. She reluctantly agreed. I only went one time. And I can't even recall the therapist's exact words and what we talked about in the session. But I do remember I walked out of that office and I felt better. I felt lighter. I felt validated. I felt seen. And even though that little office in 1995 was like dimly lit and you couldn't even find it, obviously mental health back then was not what it is today. But I left that office and I said, I'm going to be a psychologist one day and I'm going to have a beautiful office that's inviting and will just offer kids like me a safe space. And around that same time, it was like sophomore year of high school, I also had my first psych class. It was like a general psych. And I just remember being like, loving everything that I was learning. I was like, I was like reading the textbook. I was like, oh my gosh, I want to read everything psychology related. So I definitely found my passion. And I remember thinking I would be the person who could read the silence. I could hand teenagers the vocabulary for their chaos. I wanted to remind families that being too messy isn't a thing. So I planted myself really for the first half of my career. I was in the school system. I was a school counselor, school psychologist, and then I was a director of counseling. So I met students where they were. And I did enjoy that for definitely a long period of time. But of course, as we all know, school system income is only, what it is. And I was like, I want to make more money. So I did eventually open a private practice after my daughter was born, after my second child. And I really wanted it to be a space where big feelings were welcomed and healing begins with being seen. I had a lot of goals and visions at that time. and I wanted to make it much different than my first counseling experience. So I rented an office, a tiny little office, 1 day a week. And I remember telling my husband, and he kind of was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, what? Not that he wasn't supportive, but it was just kind of like out of left field, like, oh, you're putting a shingle up, you're doing this. And I was like, I'm doing it. My daughter was 4 months at the time. My little guy was a toddler. And I was like, it's now or never.
Gotta get it out of the house.
100%. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I rented this space and I found, again, it's interesting how things happen. I went to Fordham for graduate school in the city, and I ended up finding someone that randomly went to Fordham and had an office space near me. So it just kind of, I felt like, the stars were aligned. It was just kind of working out. So pretty much, I was in private practice for 5 years solo, and I was pretty much full, and I only worked, the hours I worked, but I started referring and filling all of my colleagues and friends and their practices. And then I kind of realized, what am I doing? Maybe I should help more people and give therapists, balance and freedom so they can have a job they like, right? We've all worked in places that I think were toxic. And I have stories. We'll get to those another time. But so I really wanted to have a space where I felt like, so that's when wellness counseling was born. And we really had rapid growth. Again, it was coupled around the time of COVID. So we had 3 locations. I was juggling 3 young kids, being home for remote learning. My husband at the time was leaving his medical practice with his partners to build his own practice. I ended up moving all 3 of my locations around the same time. I would not advise that. 2 of them, we included build outs. I also then had an insurance clawback happen of $300K, and I had to dip into my personal savings to, make payroll. I also had to take out a business loan. So I was just beyond exhausted, beyond stressed out. And then I had a crushing health diagnosis that I know could have been avoided because it was completely all stress related. So I kind of stood at a crossroads where I was like, what do I do next? And I think so much of my identity was wrapped into being a therapist, a psychologist, that it was very hard to tease out of like, what do I do next? It felt like if I left the field, I was like abandoning part of myself. So I did speak to a few people to sell, and I was kind of toying with the idea, but I decided at that time I was just going to level up. Part of it was probably delusion at the time, just to kind of like keep going and thinking that things were going to get better. Because I think when you're a practice owner, you always are thinking like, oh, just got to get through this. Oh, just got to get another 6 months. Oh, just got to hire 3 more people. So I definitely think at that time there was a lot of delusion involved. But the irony of it all was, and I was someone who definitely chased money, having a childhood where you move around a lot and things like that. I always wanted stability. I wanted enough money to make financial decisions so I wouldn't have to rely on certain people. And I just, I wanted to have that freedom. So I was actually making the most money I ever made in the practice at that time. And I still was miserable, very unhappy, and just not sure of what I should do next. So I chose up, as I like to say, and I did spend some time on building out a leadership team. I hired one of my clinicians to be a COO. I hired a clinical director, and I learned I had to, pretty much trade my grit, which definitely got me to a certain point, but I had to, look more at strategy. And I joined every mastermind I could. I read every leadership book under the sun. And today the practice is doing well. So I am happy about that. And there's proof that there's another way to run the marathon. But if you ask me if I would do this again, I would say no. I think sometimes when I talk to some of my clinicians and they want to open a private practice, I'll say to them, if I was you, I would stay at a practice and I'd open, all these other business ideas because you can make more money and work less. So, this podcast for me is that beacon. Together, I think we're going to navigate the peaks and valleys of running a group practice together. I don't think anybody's too broken, too complicated, or too far gone as a business owner or a clinician to find a better, brighter chapter. So I'm excited about this journey, and I'm excited that we're all getting off the chair and into some more action in our life.
Me too.
Yes.
Amen.
I was just going to say to Jen, that was a great story. I really connected to so many things you said, and especially that part about continuing to keep going. Oh, this is just one setback, but then you get stable again and then another one comes along.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the recipe for burnout, right?
Right. And I do think about that sometimes myself, even though I'm in a period where things are going well and I have built it to a certain point where I don't have to be involved in the day to day. I'd lie if I said I don't feel this like impending doom and dread at times of what's going to fall next and what's happening in our industry. And
yeah, Erica, you're such a therapist. You've got all the language. You're like, I really felt that. I connected with that. It was very I felt validated. It wasn't even my story.
I can't turn it off.
You can't. You can't. Do you still see patients?
I have a small caseload. I'm not taking any new patients right now, but yes.
Yeah. What about you, Jen? Are you still in a chair a couple hours?
I'm not.
Nice.
Yeah, I haven't been for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's all of the stuff that they tell you in the books, right? Too, when you're trying to build to sell, is that they want to see you out of the chair. They want to see the owner out of the chair, right? And so when I was listening to your story, Jen, what came up for me was the license is more of a liability than a ticket to freedom, which I think we all thought that license was going to be an insurance plan. But honestly, like it really... and when we see in our practice, we see probably 300 to 400 patients a month because we do testing, right? So we have a high volume and we accept insurance. And so, of course, you're going to get your handful of people that are just maybe not the benchmark of mental health, that didn't like their experience. And we get our board complaints. And I still get the fear of God running through me when I get that board complaint, right? Even though there's nothing that we've done, it's like they don't like our timeline or whatever. But I've often thought about resigning my license because it hasn't been the freedom that I thought it was. It's honestly been more of a liability and a carrot that has been hung over me out of fear than freedom.
I wish I had the stats, but I was on a conference. This was a few months ago, but they were saying that because you can do online for complaints, for therapist complaints, most states now have an online portal. And ever since that was instituted, obviously the numbers are through the roof of complaints.
Yeah. Yeah. And the board has to entertain every single one of them, regardless how frivolous they are. So then you have to entertain them and you have to get a lawyer and, it's a hassle. So yeah, it's, I think that the cool thing about where therapists are and clinicians in the mental health field is that we do have a specific, very specific and niche moat. I keep on using this term moat, but I've heard it used in other disciplines before, where not everybody can jump in and do what we do, given the experience that we have. And I think sometimes we forget how much experience we do have just because we're literally just trying to survive every day. And so I do believe that one of these days, if not myself, somebody will create something to go up against the juggernaut that is the insurance companies, right? But until then, we are going to help people figure out how to take that expertise and leverage it in a way that feels good again, feels joyful and fills your cup. And it feels like you're playing and you're helping at the same time. And you're not living in fear of your house being taken away.
Yeah, I want that.
Okay. I want that. I want that for you. We've said a lot. I hope that I don't come across as annoying in this whole podcast, but I have felt very stifled for a long time. Like I have to toe the line and say a certain thing. And maybe that's because also when I was owning the practice, you've got to like kind of keep your people in mind, right? You want people to still want to work, right? But I also really hope to be that person that can be a voice for people that are maybe afraid to speak out. And I know I'll probably get the negative backlash as well, but I've been so torn down after this year that like, honestly, that doesn't have a place to fall anymore. It doesn't hit as hard anymore. And I really think that our field needs strong, outspoken people that have a different narrative rather than like, okay, thank you, sir. May I have another? Thank you, sir. May I have another? Okay. And instead, like, no, I'm not going to put up with that anymore. I put all of this into my education and my time, and we're worth so much more than what we're accepting right now.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, this was fun.
So
I liked it.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Until next time.
Take care.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you next week. Bye.
That's a wrap on today's episode of Off the Chair.
If you're a clinician feeling a little more optimistic, a little more fired up, or just a little more seen, that means we did our job.
We hope today reminded you that your clinical expertise isn't just a skill, it's a moat, a damn powerful one at that. And you don't have to keep trading it in for pennies on the dollar just because the insurance companies told you so. There's so many ways to use your expertise to help, to heal, to build without burning out. And we're just getting started showing you how.
If this episode sparked something in you, subscribe, leave us a review, and come hang out on Instagram.
We share behind-the-scene chaos, bold ideas, and the tools you should have learned in grad school but didn't.
Until next time, think bigger, think sharper, think outside the box, and get off the chair.